what should I have signed from a seller and a buyer first to protect him? So we've talked about this a few times, but just to be super clear, there's two ways of doing this. If you want the most in the highest level of protection, you're going to want to get a few things signed. Number one, an exclusive right to sell. Exclusive right to sell doesn't have to mean that you have to put it on the market, but the ability to bring a buyer. Okay, exclusive right to sell agreement. Every single brokerage will have a copy of this. Second thing you're going to want to have signed is a commission agreement, which basically just saying seller agrees to pay you X% commission for bringing a buyer to the table at an agreeable price. So you have exclusive right to sell and you have a commission agreement. Okay, those two are very, very important. Then what you're going to do is that you could also have a buyer sign a commission agreement saying the buyer will protect you by saying buyer will agree to ensuring that you, the agent, is compensated at 6% total commission, seller to be paying the vast majority of it, but you can have it stated that the buyer will also ensure that you are paid a total of 6% commission. That's the third document. Next is a NDA and a CA, and a non-disclosure agreement and a confidentiality agreement. You can have the buyer sign this document, ensuring, again, basically they're not going to share any information and making sure that they don't go around you. Now, you can have all those documents signed, right? You can have the seller sign exclusive right to sell, commission agreement, NDA, CA, buyer signing, commission agreement, NDA, CA. You have all those documents signed and they can still go around you. Now, obviously, I'm going to tell you right now, of course you can fight it. I just want you to know, it's still possible. Nothing protects you 1,000%. There's just nothing that can do it. Now, you would be you'd be on the right side of things, right? If you sued, you'd be on the right side of things. If you got all of your documentation signed and they still went around you, you didn't get paid any commission. However, nothing will protect you 1,000% to ensure that it will never happen in your career. Again, I recommend, if you are worried in whatsoever, sign some documents. I would always tell you to get those documents signed. What I will tell you is that in my career, I have also just sent information without getting those documents signed. And the 99.9% of the time, I've literally been screwed over twice. I've had people go around me twice in my career and not be paid something. The other thousands of times, it's never happened, right? So if you want to get documents signed, go for it. I'm not telling you not to do it. I even recommend it in most circumstances if you're worried whatsoever. My team and I, we really don't worry about it. We don't have, I don't worry that a buyer didn't sign a commission agreement. I don't worry if a seller didn't sign a commission agreement, right? Because I'll tell you why. In my letter of intent, I will have that the seller to pay my commission. And if they sign a letter of intent, I'm in the contract. And I will make sure that in the contract also that the attorneys have me in there. Because I'm not going to lie to you, I've also had where attorneys don't put me in the contract. I'm on the letter of intent and they did not put me in the contract. And then I call them up and I'm like, what the absolute F is going on? And I was like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me either. But it's happened, right? Again, when you do a lot of business, shit's going to happen. And you got to make sure you read two things. You want to make sure you're on the letter of intent, and you want to make sure, of course, more than anything, you're in the PSA, the purchase and sale agreement. You must review it yourself. Don't just rely on your attorney or anybody's attorney. Make sure it says in there that the seller is paying you, the broker. Make sure you're in there. I've even had where randomly there was another broker involved and I had no friggin' idea. So just keep in mind that you want to double check your PSAs. But just because, you got a bunch of documents signed doesn't mean that nobody can go around you. I mean, they can do whatever they want. I'm not saying legally they're in the wrong, of course. But, to protect yourself, I would recommend getting it all signed. Okay, so let's say I get a seller on the phone. They say they would sell, so I promise a letter of intent. For the starter offer, do you typically run comparables based on past sales and then email it over and try to get some feedback? Or do you always go straight out to the market and try to get an idea from price from an investor? If it's the latter, do you get much pushback from a potential buyer if you don't have many details or price from the seller in mind? Great question. So let me kind of reiterate this. What I'm hearing you say is, because this is very common actually, you get a lead, right? You get someone who's interested in possibly selling their property. And what happens is they might not give you a lot of information, guys, right? Again, over the phone, the guy, the Linden property, if you're here in the previous conversation during the live calling session, it's not like the guy gave me a lot of information. All he said to me was that it was a mixed use. I mean, I could literally look at it. I'm looking at the street view on Reonomy. I can see it's a mixed use property. I can see there's some retail property downstairs and I can see it has an upstairs space. So I can see there's a couple retail tenants and I can see that there's something upstairs. Maybe it's office or maybe it's a multifamily, apartments. And he only said to me, based on our just chatting, that he said he earns about 10 grand a month. He didn't tell me how long the lease, and then later in the conversation, he actually told me that the leases are between 1 and 3 years, right? He said the longest one he has is about 3 years. Overall, I didn't get a lot of information. I don't know what his expenses are. I mean, I could tell that his taxes are $18,500, but I don't know what his insurance is. And he says that he pays for most of expenses. Now, look, this is ballparking some expenses, right? Or ballparking some details. It's not everything. Keep in mind that I didn't get a ton of information, but I got a decent amount on this one. There might be people who go, If you brought this out to the market and you called up a buyer, Alan, like they might say like, hey, I want a rent roll. I want to look at leases. I want to look at all this other stuff that you don't have. I understand that, which is why I prefer to just submit an offer based on myself and my own experiences. Because the last thing, think about what's going to happen. This is a very common lead that we all get, right? Like this guy, if you read between the lines, he's not really that motivated of a seller, right? If we just call a spade, he's not that motivated of a seller. You give this guy a call back after speaking to a buyer saying, the buyer goes, hey, I can't make an offer because I don't have leases and I don't have a rent roll and I don't have a P&L. Can you go get that for me? And you, the real estate agent's like, oh, these are normal questions that a buyer would have, right? Like again, if this guy wants an offer because he kind of said, hey, make me an offer. It's not like you didn't say that. So if you're not reading between the lines, you're going to kind of go to the next step, which is now you call up a buyer. The buyer goes, hey, this deal looks interesting. Maybe I can make an offer. I don't know at what price yet, but I need a rent roll, leases, copy of utility bills. I need to look at some other stuff. And then you call up the seller and you ask for all this information, and then he's probably going to tell you to F off, right? He's like, I'm not, listen, I don't need to sell it. Make me an offer, or I'm not giving you any information. And now you're stuck in this really weird back and forth. You're in the middle of this nonsense, and then you don't really get anywhere, right? This happens a lot. So you're in this weird place. So in order to kind of make sure I don't sit in this weird position forever, what I'll do is that I will make an offer right off the bat, or as soon as I possibly can, based off of comps and what I believe to be accurate and below what I believe I could sell it for. So in this scenario, all day long, I could sell this deal for substantially more than $1 million. Easily 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, maybe 1.4. Somewhere in that ballpark, I'm going to get somebody to pay me. So offering $1 million is super safe. That is an all day long and twice on whatever day you want. Okay? And what that now does is that I can vet this guy to the extent of like, hey, what's the likelihood of me being able to get to a closing table? Let's all talk about it. For those of you who are here during that call, what is the likelihood we're going to get to the closing table on this? You can put in the chat, or you can come off mute for a half a second and just tell me. What do you think the likelihood? If you heard the conversation in the previous live calling session, I want someone else to say it besides me.
5%.
5%. Okay, I like it. 5%. Okay, you got another 5% over here. Great. 10%. Okay, cool. Right? Like low. That's the whole point, right? Like I'm trying to get you guys to realize like low. The odds of us are very slim. I appreciate that, Dave. Yes, I agree. Very slim that we're going to get to a closing table. So why on planet Earth, that we all know this. We're like, guys, like we're all sitting, we all heard the same conversation. I look at it like we were all on the same team. Why on planet Earth would I ever bring this to a buyer? I probably wouldn't right now. Because this guy doesn't want to sell it. Unless he was willing to give me more information and be anywhere near a ballpark that would consider this a reasonable price deal, it's probably not going to happen. I would look at this deal as now he's given me, I have at least some information, right? I have the $10,000 in rough income. He pays all the expenses. He wants $2 million. And he said all of his leases are somewhere in that vicinity, call it, all his leases are 1 to 3 years, right? They're short-term leases. What we can kind of assume in this kind of conversation is saying like, okay, well, his net income is somewhere between probably 70, 80 grand, right? We could probably make that assumption. And based off of that number and talking to an investor, say like, listen, this is all the information I have. We're not getting a rent roll. We're not getting a P&L. We're not getting anything else. And you have a buyer that you trust who's in that market, you might be able to get them to make an offer for you. You might, but they're probably going to come in with an offer of probably a 7 cap right now based on interest, interest rates right now. So $70,000 divided by 7% is only $1 million, guys. If we went off of $80,000 divided by 7%, we're at 1,142. Now look, maybe we can go to a 6% cap rate. 80,000 divided by 6%, we're only looking at 1.3 and change without any other information. So like right now, if this guy's stuck at $2 million, this is what ends up costing you time, energy, and effort, and what holds you back from closing more deals because you're spending too much time on people like this who are never going to transact. These are the types of deals where I probably wouldn't even put it in front of a buyer unless I have a guy who I super trust and I know who's willing to overpay in a local market, which is very rare, right? Like I'll give you an example. In the state of New Jersey, there's a market called Lakewood. There's a town called Jackson right next to it. My friends are Hasidic Jews. I'm Jewish, whatever, and I'm just being direct with you guys, but very religious area. And in the Jewish communities, they will overpay in certain areas. I work with them a lot. They're like family to me. Like we do a lot of business together. And in those markets, I can get stupid prices. Like if this property was in one of those markets, I could sell this for $300 a foot. Right now, this property would probably trade for like maybe $150, $160 a foot because the income is so bad. In these markets, and if it was in these other areas in New Jersey, I could sell this for $300 a foot at a 2 cap. It wouldn't matter, right? People just like those areas as much as it is. So it just depends on the location.